If you look at the plants over here, the snails are not confused. they, you know, if you look at these, there's no confusion, right? And I think if I broke off any one of these leaves, turn it upside down. Hey, it's Greg here with maritimegardening.com, and I thought I'd do a short video here talking about kale and a way to avoid kale pests. And I'm speaking specifically about slugs and snails. I'm talking about a way of avoiding those pests without using any sort of tricks. No pesticides, no buckets of beer, no nothing. Just a simple application of understanding those two pests and applying a little bit of logic. So it's the end of August, and fall's right around the corner, and fall, especially once you start getting frost, is when you get the best out of your kale. That's when they taste the best. And so this time of year, I like to sort of give my kale gardens all a makeover, and so they can put on some real growth over the course of September. And then I can harvest a whole bunch of it in October, November, freeze it, put it down, basically harvest it at its best. I mean, I've been harvesting it all summer, from some point in June onward, June or July, harvesting kale, and I don't have to buy it anymore. And I've got a steady supply of it all summer long. But coming into this time of year, I start blanching and freezing as much as I can so I can have it all winter long and I don't have to buy it, and I can use my kale. What the heck is the... What in the hell? You wouldn't believe how many chipmunks I've had in this garden this year. It's just an incredible problem. I've got so many bloody chipmunks there. Anyway, they just almost ran into my lap. Anyway, back to kale. I have found that the spacing really matters. So I'm going to take you and show you some of my kale here. Some of it's got an incredible amount of slug and snail damage, and some of it hardly has any slug and snail damage at all. And I think the real reason is because of the spacing. And there's a certain logic to that, and I'll explain that as we go along here. But yeah, that's the theme of this video. A simple way to avoid slug and snail damage, applying just a little bit of understanding about how snails and slugs think, and applying a little logic to that understanding in your garden. Now, before I get started, I know there's ways to avoid having snails in your garden. You can do this, you can do that. The way I garden, everything gets covered with different kinds of yard waste because it's easy for me to get. It's just the easiest thing. I drive home from work, I stick a bag of leaves or grass clippings in the trunk of my car, and then I throw it on my garden bed. I basically cover every one of these garden beds with yard waste. There's different ways to do that. You don't have to use yard waste, but that's just the easiest thing for me to get a hold of, so that's what I tend to use. One consequence of having a heavily mulched garden is that you have a lot of slugs and snails. They love that environment, and it's not a real problem. I'd say at least half the plants in my garden aren't affected by slugs and snails at all anyway. And then the other ones are only affected by slugs and snails when they're young. And there's only a couple that are perpetually at risk of slug and snail damage. And even those, it's only certain leaves. Basically, it's the lower leaves and the more sort of tired out and worn out leaves that tend to get attacked by the slugs and snails as we move into July, August, that sort of thing. So really, all the slugs and snails that are the consequence of my heavy mulch system gardening are really not that much of a problem. And in fact, and there's plenty of literature that supports this, they contribute almost as much as the worms do in taking that mulch and turning it into soil, right? Breaking it down into compost and that sort of thing. They process a lot of rotting vegetation. Like, they're not always eating your tender greens. There's a lot of different kinds of slugs and snails, and depending on, I guess, whatever mood they're in, they don't just eat your tender greens, they eat other things too, right? So they'll come out, they'll eat your tender greens when they feel safe to eat them, like at night, right? But during the day, they're gonna leave them alone. And they tend to attack your tender greens a lot more when they're really young, as opposed to when they're older. But enough of this babble. Let's go have a look around. Let me show you some of that damage in my garden. All right, so here we have a kale garden. And I apologize, there's a bit of construction work going on the property next to mine. Seems like all I have to do to inspire someone to renovate their home is to shoot a video. Anyway, this is a weird sort of garden. I don't really normally do this sort of thing, but I interplanted kale in with this sorrel. And the sorrel is very leafy, and it's a bit tight. And but look at this kale at the end here, okay? Really no pest damage. If there's any leaves that get pest damage, it's the lower ones. So if you look at this plant here, right? It's the lower leaves that seem to get more shot up and more holes and stuff, right? The lower leaves. But these ones here are nicely spaced out, right? And there's hardly any damage. You can see the leaves look really nice, really healthy, really clean, right? And then we move over here. Look at the ones that, sorry about the shadow. Look at the ones that are in right next to the sorrel, touching the sorrel, right? Look at the damage. See how they're all sort of interplanted in with it? And see how damaged they are? Look at this one. It's practically skeletonized, right? All the ones that were right in there. And see, the snails aren't attacking the sorrel because they don't like it. You know, if you ever eat the two of them, the sorrel has a sort of lemon bitterness to it, which I guess they don't like, or certainly they prefer. You know, it gets the odd bite, but not too much, right? They're kind of pest-proof plant, sorrel. So it's nice in that sense, but on the other end of it, it's not the tastiest plant in the world. It goes with things. You wouldn't just have at least I wouldn't think of having a plate of sorrel. I might mix it in with my kale, maybe a ratio of 4 to 1. Gives it a bit of a lemony taste. And you put it in with, if you're having a salad, you have a little bit of sorrel. So I planted way too much, given that I have to sort of smuggle it into things. And it's a wonderful green to have, but I'm just saying. Anyway, everywhere where the kale is jammed in with planting, touching its other kale, right? The kale here were a bit tightly packed. I thinned them out, but they still seem to be getting infiltrated by the sorrel, right? Everywhere they're touching it, the kale seems to be compromised, right? Look over here. These kale have their own space. They're not jammed in with the sorrel. Look how clean and beautiful this kale is, right? It's pest-free, right? If I don't keep up with the harvesting, see how the lower leaves, look at these leaves here, the lower ones, they get attacked. Once they, see the color difference? I don't know if it's, sorry, I'm not doing a very good job with my shadows here, but maybe you can see here. Here's a kale that's nice and green. And here's a kale that's it's sort of done, and it's below. It's been outgrown by newer leaves, and so it's getting in the shade. Once it gets in the shade, it changes color like this, and this is when it starts getting attacked by snails. I don't think they're eating it because it's changed color. It's possible. It's possible that the plant's sending less, whatever it is snails don't like. It's possible the plant's sending less of that to the lower leaves. But I think what really happens is that the snail, there's a snail right there, and look how tiny these are. People tell me they should pick them off. You know how small that is? Right next to my thumb there. How are you going to pick those off? Seriously? And they get smaller than that. I've got snails that are the size of like a sesame seed in here, and I've got huge slugs and huge snails too. You can't pick them off, right? But the smartest thing you can do in your garden is figure out a way for all the living things in the ecosystem that is adjacent and within your garden to take the slugs out for you, right? I got lots of different kinds of birds in here. I never find the birds to be much of a problem. They might take the odd blueberry or something here and there, but or a strawberry, but they don't bother my kale at all. But they're in the kale all the time because I think they're searching for little snails. So I think the snail and the slug are a shade-seeking animal. That's why they come out at night. They like the darkness. They don't like the sun. And so they like these lower leaves because they're in the shade and they just feel safer. They're less inclined to getting picked off. I mean, they're not really thinking, they're reacting, right? The snails that avoid light get to pass their genes on. Snails like that like being out in the full light of day. That branch of evolution just doesn't go anywhere, right? They're a darkness or shade-seeking creatures, so they like the lower leaves because they're shade, and they like when plants are jammed in with other plants, like these ones here, right? Because there's shade, and it's safer, and they feel safer, right? They don't like a big open situation like this, right? They don't feel safe there. So it's not that there isn't any snails or slugs around this plant. It's just there's so much light here, they're going elsewhere. They're sort of setting up shop over here. So they're here all the time. When it's nighttime, they all come up and go crazy. Right, so that's it. All you got to do is keep a space. Now, for me, I would say the minimum, and really the ideal space would be, let's say, for me it's like 2 hand spans. So anywhere from 10 to 12 to 16 inches, depends on your hand, I suppose. These ones seem to be about 14 inches apart. So I use a general rule of thumb for a hand span. My hand span's about 8 inches, I think. So that's 16 inches. But when they're really small, it seems like a bit too much space. But you got to remember that your kale is going to have almost a 2-foot radius when it's fully mature. And the less to an extent that it's touching other kale and other kinds of plants, the less slugs and snail problems you're going to have. Also, if you've got it planted in adjacent to something snails don't like. I mean, in permaculture and no-till gardening, people always talk about trap plants. Well, there's all kinds of snails and slugs in this garden, right? Because I've got a mulch on there, and they just love that environment, and they can be beneficial in breaking down the mulch. But if you've got something they like interplanted with something they hate, then all the attention is going to go to the thing they like. So, there's an argument that you put them in with something they don't like, and it confuses them. I don't think it confuses them. I think it's they're like, okay, half of the area has got stuff we don't like. Let's focus all our energy over here. I don't. If you look at the plants over here, the snails are not confused. If you look at these, there's no confusion, right? And I think if I broke off any one of these leaves and turned it upside down, took a real good look, I could probably find the pests, right? But yeah, the slugs and snails are not confused by the presence of these plants they don't like, right? So interplanting them with sorrel did nothing to prevent anything. If anything, it's basically driving the snails towards my kale. So I will not interplant with that again. Right? Now, here's another kind of kale. This is winter boar kale. It's like a Scotch curly kale, that type of kale. And, some varieties of kale are also just a little bit more pest resistant. I think the texture of this is something, I don't think slugs like the texture of this. It's kind of almost, maybe it feels prickly to them. I don't know. I do not find that these kale tend to get anywhere near the kind of slug and snail damage that these ones over here do. This sort of Siberian kale, or it's like red Russian kale, only it's not red. Basically, it's just flavor-wise, it tastes the same as red Russian kale, I imagine. Anyway, I find this type of plant is very slug and snail free, but I don't like the taste of it as much. It just doesn't seem to. My wife and kids don't like it as much either. So now this one doesn't taste. This one really improves in October, November. Whereas the Siberian kale tastes good all summer and it tastes good all summer, and it tastes even better in the fall. This one is really subpar all summer and good in the fall. But it is slug and snail proof to a large extent. And I think it's because of its growing habit. Once it gets some height, it kind of looks like a tree, right? And so this is so woody and so hard, right? The slug's just wandering along, in this mulch. And, when it butts up against this, it just doesn't feel compelled to go up, right? It's going to stay down here where it's safe, where they got some cover from pests, and there's just nothing drawing it up that stalk, right, to the good stuff that's above it, right? So they just leave it alone. It's basically slug and snail proof. I find it to be anyway. So that's another approach, is to plant something that isn't their favorite thing. I find curly kale in general tends to be like that, but especially these ones that grow high like this, right? once they get to, I mean, you know, they can get some, when they're really, really small and an inch or two high, they're just as vulnerable as any other crucifer. Once they get 6, 7, 8 inches high, they really don't have too many problems. Nothing's attacked these at all. Now here's some, you know, some more Siberian kale, different part of the garden. And you see the ones that were out in front tend to be, you know, less damaged than the ones that are sort of back. See all these weeds that are reaching in from the area outside the fence, right? I mean, sure, I could pluck all these weeds and keep on top of them, but when you're gardening on the scale I am, 2,500 square foot garden, you tend to just let the leaves. There's some point in the year you just don't bother fighting weeds. You can deal with them in the fall. But you see this plant, I mean, it's a healthy plant, right? But in the areas where it's sort of in with other stuff and there's other kinds of leaves in there, you know, it's just getting picked apart, right? But you can tell that the ones that are in the front have much less slug and snail damage. Here's a kale plant that is, it's just a seed that, look, you can see it's in my walkway. It's growing in sand. Now, I mean, this sand was placed over. These used to be walking paths mulched with wood chips, so there's pretty good sort of soil underneath the sand once you go down about 4 or 5 inches. So this seed must have just fallen on the ground. Maybe I dropped it, I don't know. And this plant just started growing, I let it go. And I mean, look how beautiful it is, right? No snail damage, no slug damage, nothing. Right? Now part of that is because not too many slugs and snails crawling across this stuff. But I had another one come up in a different part of my garden where there was a bunch of sort of weed plants laying over it. And that one was slug proof for a while, but once it was basically growing next to my raspberries. And so when there was no raspberries, the plant was totally pest free. But as the foliage of the raspberries got more and more and more, and it became more shady where that plant was, it just started getting picked to pieces. So, I mean, to me, that's another sort of proof of concept that if you can keep your plants well spaced out and just, you know, keep picking them, stay on top of your plants, pick the lower leaves off, and just prevent shade. And your slugs and snails will tend to, you know, avoid that source of food. Or if they do, take the risk of going up your plants, the various kinds of predatory insects, or even, you know, garter snakes. One great thing about having these sandy pathways is I can see what's walking around in my garden. So actually, I should have put it on film this morning, but I could see where a snake had been slithering along in my garden because it left like snake tracks, slither tracks in my sand. But they'll eat slugs and snails, right? So anyway, yeah, by spacing it out, you're going to greatly reduce the risk of pests, at least slugs and snails anyway, because number one, the slugs and snails don't like that. They like shade and darkness. And number two, it helps your beneficials, the things that eat slugs and snails, helps them find them and eat them and take care of the problem for you, which is what you want. All right, so slugs and snails, are they a problem? They can be a beneficial thing in your garden. They can help break down all your mulch and turn it gradually into fantastic soil. They can work with your worms and all the other different organisms that are in your soil system to improve your soil. And if you apply a little bit of science, a little bit of logic to their behavior, you can greatly reduce the impact that they have on your kale. Now, what am I going to do today? I'm going to take this and thin it out and make some more space so that these kale, all these leaves that are damaged, remove them. The plant has a huge root system underneath, and it can come back from all of that, and it can put on a lot of growth in September. So I'm going to thin this all out and make a separate video about that. But that's the principle, that's the idea. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.